Well, now you got into this mess by going down a waterfall. Now, how would you suppose we can get them out of there?
By going up the waterfall?
That's right. Anything's possible in Disneyland.
Welcome, friends, to episode 31 of Up the Waterfall with your hosts, Xana and Scott Otis.
Hello.
This week, we're jumping into the time machine, not to be confused with your time machine vehicle. That's a different episode. And we're journeying back to the original Epcot Center Future World attraction, World of Motion, presented by General Motors. Of course, this is a favorite of both Scott and mine. I think it stands right on par with Horizons as far as storyline goes.
Yes, it is. I mean, for a long time, when Horizons kind of went away after a long while, it was the one that I missed the most. And then after I got thinking about it, yeah, I really started missing World of Motion, if not, the same amount, if not more.
I agree. And to help us celebrate this incredible attraction, we've brought in our first ever Up the Waterfall guest, friend, historian, writer, author of the Progress City Primer, Stories, Secrets, and Silliness from the Many Worlds of Walt Disney, published in 2015, as well as the ProgressCityUSA.com website, and the recently returned Progress City Radio Hour.
Yay.
And he's our good friend on top of that, Michael Crawford.
Woohoo!
Thank
Hey,
you for
guys.
joining us, Michael. We're
Welcome.
so
Thanks for
happy
having
to have you
me.
here with us.
Oh, I'm
I
glad
think,
to be here.
This first guest will live in infamy.
I think so.
Probably so.
Before we jumped in, just in case, we never know who's listening or if anyone knows who we are, of course. So I wanted to give a little backstory of how we all kind of met and became friends. It was many moons ago on the original Disney Twitter before we even
yes.
really called it that. And around 2009, 2010 is when I joined in, and you guys were all doing your own thing. There was, Michael was there, Foxy Hooves was there, George from Imaginerding, and you guys would talk about amazing things, Disney history, and it would happen late at night usually.
Yeah, the chummery. we called ourselves
Yes.
the chummery, yeah.
And I would usually join in the next day until I realized, hey, I need to stay up late if I want to talk to these guys at all. And of course, I didn't really have much to add at all. I was just like, yeah, I remember that. It was cool or something. But anyway, it was a fun time. And, eventually I met Michael for the first time at Destination D here in Walt Disney World.
Yeah, that was 2011. I actually met him at the Destination D, the first one, at 2010 at Disneyland.
Oh, that's
And-
right. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wasn't sentient in the D23 world yet at that point, so I
That's okay.
I didn't go to those.
You joined later.
I did, and I was
That
very
was fun.
excited to meet him. And yeah, and then we saw each other at Expo and things like that after that, and he was at our wedding when we got married, so it was a fun time all around. And you then went to you lived in LA and were working out there, and then you came back and are here in Orlando, so
hmm
we're
Yeah,
excited and
it's-
happy to have you here.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's been a wild decade, I guess, since our first meeting. It's been kind of crazy.
Yes. So we'll jump right in. I think part of what makes World of Motion so beloved is the same thing that makes the original Future World attractions so wonderful and so memorable. And that is, of course, the perfect storm of great narration, great background music that, weaves its way throughout the whole attraction in different arrangements, relatable scenes and characters that, make you chuckle if they're doing their job, and things that make you want to find out, how did they do that? Would you all agree?
I would.
Yeah, and again, the sheer scope of the attraction. This was a big attraction with a ton of animatronics and a lot of special effects, a lot of big show scenes. It was a very long ride. It was, I think, more than 14 minutes long. and so it was a big spectacle.
Yeah. Unheard of in this day and age.
And it
Ever
was a
ride one.
fairly large building as well.
Yeah, I think that's part of what, just walking up to it and seeing that it went outside and it was this huge reflective wheel.
Yeah.
Just made you want to go inside and find out what was going on in there. But I think you guys can probably speak to this more than me, where its origins were really with the Ford's Magic Skyway.
Ah, yes. Michael, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, for the 64-65 New York World's Fair, Disney had approached Ford to sponsor an attraction, and they did the Ford's Magic Skyway, which was kind of intended to roll out the new Mustang, which was the hot thing at the time.
That's right.
And it was a trip through history, riding in a Ford automobile, and you'd see dinosaurs and cavemen, and it would sort of take you through that in the origin of the wheel, and then wind up in a sort of futuristic city. So
that kind of thing that you would always see when you're driving in your brand new Ford Mustang.
exactly,
Dinosaurs
exactly.
and cavemen.
Dinosaurs and cavemen. Yeah. So when it came time to do Epcot, General Motors didn't want to let Ford win again, and so they stepped up and became the actual first sponsor to sign on for all of Epcot
Yeah,
Center.
that's right. They were the very first sponsor. I think that was, 1977?
Yeah, the end of 1977, and
Wow.
that really played a big part in helping the entire Epcot project go forward, because it gave Cardwalker a little bit of confidence that this might work.
Yeah, and having such a big name like General Motors, it helped get a lot of the other sponsors for all of the other attractions and the pavilions there.
Totally.
So, because that's a big name, and that was a 10-year contract, right?
That's right. Yeah, all the big sponsors were 10-year contracts they signed them to. So, and you're right, it was a prestige thing. So it really did help bring other people on board. Once you had a company as big as General Motors, everybody else fell in line.
And even I think at that time they were probably the biggest company in the country, if I'm not mistaken. It definitely in the top 5.
So how much of Ford's Magic Skyway ended up in World of Motion? There was
It wasn't
the caveman
yeah, there are a few
scene
things.
ish, right?
Yeah, I would say it was the cavemen. The idea of the foot power came through, and the presentation of the wheel to the king.
Oh.
That came directly from there, with the the idea of the failed wheels, if you will, being like the triangle and the square that didn't quite pass muster, but it was the round one that, so that scene actually came straight from there. Were there any others, Michael?
Not really. Well, that and the futuristic city at the end
Yes.
really ties it together. The other aspect, the dinosaurs, wound up at the Universe of Energy. So
Yeah.
a lot of that wound up in Epcot, but kind of in different places.
And the actual dinosaurs, of course, were shown at the Primeval World section of the Disneyland Railroad in between Tomorrowland and Main Street, as a lot of you may know. But the cavemen did not survive to Disneyland.
Womp womp. I think another one of the main parts that made World of Motion so great was Gary Owens as the narrator, which I didn't even realize back in the day who that was narrating. It wasn't until I, looked up years later. I was like, oh, wait, because I used to watch reruns of Laugh-In on like Nick at Night or whenever it was on, like in the 80s or something. So I think he just really had the perfect like straight man narration to go with the visual gags that were happening in front of you.
Yeah, I never grew up watching that show either, and so I was introduced to Gary Owens from World of Motion. It was later that I found out that he was, he's got that classic voice. That's just perfect as the narration for that attraction, because he's kind of the straight man to the hilarity of the scenes that we were being presented with. He basically, the idea being that he's basically showing that transportation, we're making such strides and everything's so perfect, and what we're seeing is anything but. Kind of like the idea of perfect transportation, but it being kind of foiled.
Yeah, and he's very enthusiastic too. He's really this sort of chipper, everything is great kind of narration. It's perfect.
Part of what made the visual gag so great was, of course, Ward Kimball being behind designing those fun scenes. Is that true?
Yeah, he contributed quite a bit. Also, his love of transportation, his love of trains and vintage automobiles, really contributed a lot of knowledge and reality to the props and the propping out of the attraction. But also, Mark Davis,
yes,
was a huge influence. Mark did a lot of the gags. The way it was set up, like most Epcot pavilions, it began with Claude Coates. And Claude was on it at first and had a really kind of a more film-based attraction. Kind of, think about if you had Wings and some of the things that he worked on that were really about staging scenes around film and sort of lightly dimensional sets and then lots of film. So that's what he had been working on. And then in 1977, they brought in Mark Davis and Ex Atencio, and they started adding in gags. And then in 78, Ward Kimball was called in, and they, between Mark and Ward, they made it less film-based and more humorous. And then they stayed on to add sort of gags to it. So a lot of that humor, it started off being not so humorous a thing, and then they came in and, being such great gag men, added in a lot of that humor.
And there must have been a lot of confusion then, because I think with their egos, they probably, each one probably thought that they were the head of this project, and maybe there might have been some confusion there.
Right. In the great Chris Merritt, Mark Davis book, there's a lot of talk about how, Claude didn't like the change in focus to being less serious. And then, you basically had Claude and Mark and Ward as both three creative directors. And, Mark didn't like how Ward was staging his gags. And, nobody really knew who was officially in charge. And so there was sort of, Claude went off to work on what became Horizons. And by the end, it was sort of Ward who was left standing to sort of set things up and set everything up.
But despite all that, I think what we ended up with was still quite an attraction.
Yeah, I can't imagine it being just like a serious, film and props situation.
Right. But it turns out there actually was quite a bit of film throughout, maybe not exactly live action film, but like some animated sequences that would accompany a lot of the scenes, whether it just be like turning wheels or various modes of transportation kind of moving along. They often had video segments that were running throughout.
And of course the speed tunnels.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yes. that is the remaining major Claude influences. Even after he moved on to work on other things, he stayed to work on those speed tunnels, because that's like pure Claude Coates kind of stuff. So that's his lingering influence, and we got three of them, three speed tunnels.
And actually, having grown up at Disneyland myself, I remembered those from the People Mover out there. That they had them there as you were kind of winding around the America Sings attraction, which they then later turned to the Tron super speed tunnel. So
right.
And then they brought that to World of Motion,
which at the time I don't think I realized was Tron either. I was just like, oh, cool shapes.
Well, actually, didn't they
but
have
I did later realize
a portion of that in the If You Had Wings finale?
The Tron thing?
No, not Tron.
Oh,
not Tron, but there was
there was a speed
room.
Yeah, for sure. I loved those so much as a child. They were just like a chance to either immerse yourself and like feel like you were actually moving through whatever was being shown, or you could just turn around and see like how everything worked and see where things were coming from and what was underneath you. And all
Yes,
that kind of stuff.
totally. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a lost start. It's
I
time to bring those
know.
back.
Exactly.
So yeah, I remember that animated sequence being from Tron, but I guess a lot of guests didn't. They thought it was maybe just kind of like mystical modes of transportation.
Yeah, I think, when I was first on it, that's what I thought. And then later I was like, hey, that's the same shape that's in Tron,
That's right.
of that big thing. The technical term. Yeah, I mean, the scenes and everything just meshed together so perfectly. And I think you mentioned before, Michael, that there's so many props. There's 3,375 props.
That's a lot of props.
And including the locomotive was built, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, from scratch, but to scale.
I believe so.
And the World War I biplane was also built. But then other things were like actual vehicles.
Yeah, they had
and
a lot
stuff.
of the vintage vehicles that they were able to find and populate throughout the attraction. Yeah.
And I always thought the scene where you're going through and it had like the cars with all the different like signs written on them and stuff like that. I was just reading about this earlier. It said they were like 2/3 scale or something like that. Is that true? And if
I
so,
think they were actual cars.
That's what I thought.
Cars. Yeah.
It didn't make any sense when I was reading them. I'm like, what do you mean? How do you, like, if they were authentic cars, how did they become 2/3 scale? It made no sense to me.
I think that might have been confused with something else that might have been scaled down, but I'm not sure what.
I don't know what it was, but oh well. I thought I'd get clarification, so glad to know they were real because they looked real. That was always a fun scene too, just to see all the different people and what they were saying and stuff was going on behind them. It was a fun time. But of course, we cannot forget the finale, the center core. I love that so much. I wish that there was better video of it so I could watch it a million times and listen to the music and just be transported back.
What was interesting about that was that it was so ethereal. I mean, there was nothing that really specifically represented any mode of transportation. It was a lot of little moving bits of light that made it that you weren't quite sure what you were looking at, but it was so massive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
In looking back at some of the memos at the time and the sort of creative process that went into this, it started off as a much more specific vision of they wanted it to be a more specific vision of like a futuristic city, but GM wanted it to be like what you were saying, Scott, not specifically defining any definitive transportation systems. It was just meant to suggest like movement and motion and freedom and that sort of thing, and that's really very intentionally what they wanted to do.
Right, and I think a lot of that, the feelings that the guests had as they were writing through that was because of the music. That was so. I mean, I don't even know how to say it other than ethereal.
Well, when I was writing my notes up for it, I wrote that it was like very Star Trek-y.
Oh yeah.
Like the part where the lady's like singing very like operatic, like verse, but it's fun to be free. It's still the same melody, but it's just so different and unique.
It definitely slowed down at that point.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I miss so much about Epcot is like the music is just, it was so present everywhere and it was all connected. And I think that final scene was just like the culmination of all of the different versions of It's Fun to Be Free. And then like you were saying, how there was different types and speeds of movement, like there would be things moving really fast, there would be slow elevators going up, and it was just so, you saw a different thing every time you went through. And then of course the black light just made it all the more magical and wondrous.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't even realize at the time that was probably, I think, the only scene within the entire attraction that was that took up the entire height of the entire 65-foot building. Is that true, Michael?
Yeah, that's right. And that's the thing a lot of people don't like get from pictures and things like that. It's like Xana said, I wish there was better documentation. It's just one of those things that doesn't photograph well, especially on video of the 80s. And people don't grasp the scale. Occasionally I post pictures on Twitter of like the construction of it with like people down there, and only then when you see it with like people in the set do you realize how huge it was. It really was just an enormous illusion that these guys worked on. And it was, you know, Wathel Rogers and Yale Gracie and Chris Runko and Mark Fuller, like these effects guys. And it was just an incredible scene. And the music, like you said, it's one of the best Epcot music cues of all. And it's something that I always put on my Epcot mixes because it's a really sort of dreamy, relaxing kind of tune.
Yeah.
Right, and actually started in the queue as something completely different, where it was a lot more whimsical as you're waiting to board the vehicle. Lots of different variations of the "It's Fun to Be Free" song.
Yeah, there's so many different people singing that song throughout the ride, including the
And it would
Spike
kind of
Jonze.
take you through time and sort of different like genres of music. But do you remember how it would do, like it would play like a ragtime kind of version or something like that, but then it would have overhead, and I guess they had them sequenced through the speakers where it would sound like a fire engine or something, or a jet airplane.
Different
would like
modes of
be coming overhead.
transportation,
Yes.
would be passing over your head. Exactly. Like
So
a
cool.
helicopter or other various things. A speedboat. So yeah, and but I didn't want to just leave on that note. I wanted to kind of go through a little bit more
Oh
of
yeah,
the attraction
go
as
through
well,
each scene if you want.
because,
I'm fine with that.
I mean, I couldn't not talk about the thing that kind of drew you to, the one part of the ride vehicle that actually went out of the building and wrapped around
Yes.
the pole at the front. So basically there's this one little track that just kind of does almost a 180, where it's kind of increasing, basically going from the load platform on the first floor to where all the show scenes are on the second floor. It essentially exits the building and wraps around, increasing in height. And that, to me, that was always a lot of fun, even though you weren't really seeing any show scenes. It was probably one of the better vantage points.
Oh
of
yeah,
Epcot
you could
Center
get your
from up
great
there.
photos of Spaceship Earth, and if you were lucky, the monorail going by.
Oh yeah.
Lots
Yes.
of blurry photos of that from me, I'm sure.
It was really
And-
just the Great Vista, and Horizons was right there too.
Yes,
So,
exactly. And then seeing it at night, it was completely different
Oh, yeah.
experience, and that was always super cool. Epcot at night, that's like a whole episode,
Right.
I think.
So I did want to kind of go through some of the more of the show scenes. I just didn't want to ignore.
No,
all
I
of
know.
those.
I went to the end really quick because I love it
that's
so
okay.
much. We can revisit it again.
So the very first thing that you would enter is you'd be as soon as you exited that portion, you would be in complete darkness, and then you'd see little footprints going all around, including above you for some reason.
But you'd also get that wonderful air conditioning
right.
blowing on you.
Yes.
Which was
Yes.
at some points the best part.
Yes, in Florida.
You were finally sitting down in the vehicle, and then you got the air conditioning on you. So
Yeah,
it was,
because
like,
even though
perfect.
the queue would always be very fast moving, it was always you'd be thinking that you finally had a seat, and you were traveling.
Yeah. I think, back in the day, that was when all of us were certainly visiting Epcot as a like opening to close scenario, not like now where we're just like, oh, we'll go in for lunch. Well, not right
Right.
now, but
Yeah.
But anyway, it's at that point that you would see these cavemen kind of blowing on their feet, because at this portion in time, the only thing that we had was foot power, and that's how we got around. And it was shortly after that we realized that we could actually use these beasts of burden to get around and kind of ride on the backs of I guess in this show scene they actually had all kinds of various animals, including oxen and zebras of all things.
Yes.
And I think they even threw in, for some reason, a flying carpet.
Yeah, that was a Ward Kimball edition. That was this was a scene that Mark Davis came up with, but Ward added in that flying carpet because he wanted that in there.
And what's funny is that in a lot of the marketing that they would have for this attraction, they would often show that flying carpet.
Mm-hmm.
Who wouldn't want to go on a ride with a flying carpet? It's a good selling point.
I guess. But anyway, after that after seeing all of these animals that were just kind of struggling, and a lot of them had very exaggerated faces, like they were being forced to do things beyond even their abilities, is at that point that we got to the creation of the wheel, which was that funny gag where a lot of these essentially inventors were trying to come up with the perfect thing, and one guy had made the triangle wheel, one had made a square, and the other one, a circle. And like the king had to choose between of those three, and I think he made a wise choice with the round one.
And he was happy too. He was
was doing his little giggle, which I used to imitate.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many funny and fun like sound effects that came from, specific animatronics or whatever back in the day that I'm sure they're ingrained in all of our brains. Like, I won't do it now. I'll spare you.
And I think at this point we can say that because of the sheer quantity of animatronics, the range of motion for all of these animatronics wasn't the greatest in the park. It didn't have the most amount of fluidity or anything. They had very simple things that they were doing because there were so many. Basically, you were seeing stuff on the left, on the right. You're just kind of looking all around, and so you didn't really need to have as much with them.
Yeah, I think we were a lot less concerned with how advanced animatronics were back then. We were just like, oh, there's so many. Or something.
And that, because of the sheer quantity on this one, I think that was the wow factor.
Right. Well, and a lot goes into how they're staged, and even goes back to like Mark Davis's, the way he would draw gags and set them up. There's like a lot of implied motion.
Yeah.
It's how the characters are posed at this like key moment where you can tell what the motion is, even if there's not a lot of actual physical motion. It's a sort of trick, and like you said, there was stuff everywhere to see, so you were looking all over the place, and there was motion everywhere. It just wasn't, advanced animatronic motion.
And in addition to the animatronics, as I mentioned before, that's where they had a lot of the kind of the animated film sequences, where like if there was kind of like a spare wall, they would have like even just like a bunch of wheels just turning around at this one point. In a lot of transitions spaces had this too, just kind of like to always have some form of motion no matter where you were.
That's true.
Yeah, I think Ken O'Connor, who was an artist, I think he did a lot of those like crazy flying machines and things like that were always just kind of there in the background.
I forgot about those.
Yeah, and then at this point, that's where we got to the used chariot lot, which was kind of funny because with all of these applications of the wheel, now you have all of these things that are kind of like used and they're trying to get rid of, including the Trojan horse, of all things, that had only been used once.
It was on sale, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah, and then, of course they had a stereotypical kind of like a used car salesman kind of a guy trying to unload some lemons, if you will. And that's where you get to the sailing ships. That's where you now have the idea of taking ships across water and going over more vast, I was going to say land, but in this case it's sea. And they have that one scene where the guy on the ship who's kind of looking through his little periscope, or not periscope, what is that?
Telescope.
Yeah, that.
It's a little spyglass.
Yeah,
The spyglass is looking straight into the eye of a sea serpent.
This is one that was always in the ads.
This
was the one they always used for things.
Because the sea serpent kind of like doing his like, he's got only one eye open, staring right into it, which is kind of funny. And of course, this leads into Leonardo da Vinci's studio, where he's kind of working on a flying contraption, while Mona Lisa is impatiently waiting to be painted. So I guess he's kind of drifted off of that project and onto this other one, and that flying machine didn't quite work out.
As she's tapping her toes,
Yeah.
she's unhappy.
I always loved that scene because I never really thought about Mona Lisa, the person, beforehand.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, I wonder what she was
Yeah,
like. And it
everyone
made me think.
has always wondered, like, is that a smile or not? But here you could tell, yeah, she's not smiling. Like, hey, what about me? And yeah, so those flying machines didn't quite pan out, but they will later, and that's when they had the famed balloon.
The balloon.
sequence.
I've retracted we did a Jules Verne episode, and I was convinced that the balloon scene from World of Motion had to have been from 100 or whatever,
No,
80
around the
days
world in
around the
80
world in
days.
80 days.
Oh yeah.
But since looking at photos and everything, I guess I'm wrong. So
You're not wrong. I think the idea is there.
Same spirit. Yeah, this is a French guy, but
yeah, just
yeah, it's the same spirit, same era. Yeah.
with a fun pig with him
Yeah,
in
of
the
course.
basket.
If you're going to fly in a hot air balloon, what better way to travel than with a giant pig?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know.
Just in case.
Yeah, and of course, then that takes us into the steam era, where you have the introduction to steam power. Where what's going on in that scene, Michael?
Isn't
They
it?
have a steam-powered contraption that has sort of run off the road, and there's a bull that has escaped. Yeah, he's been fenced in, but he's kind of escaped.
This
And
was my
Susanna, you
least
had problems
favorite
with that bull,
scene
right?
because it was
Oh,
so
really?
loud and scary, and I didn't like him. I wasn't a fan of dinosaurs originally either. Like I would go to Universe of Energy, but I was very reluctant because I did not like scary things. And to me, the bull was very scary, and he was so loud.
Yeah, you kind of turn
When
a
he
corner
would-
and he'd be there grunting.
Yeah.
Pretty
Yeah, it's
loud
funny
voice.
because I was always scared of the sea serpent. It was the sea
wow.
serpent that did it for me, and I would want to be on the other side of the car from where the sea serpent,
Aw.
because you knew where he was going to be,
Exactly.
so you wanted to be on the other side of the car
Yes.
from that.
That was like my kids in the Great Movie Ride with Alien.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
And me
For
too,
real.
a little bit.
And of course, that leads to the big Mississippi River boat, the steamboat, which was kind of an odd scene because they could have done a lot more with this, and I think they had a lot more planned for this scene. But it just turns out it was kind of like the loading area for a steam whaler. Is that right?
Yeah, you could see like the silhouettes of the people dancing on board, and like the Dixieland band playing, and there was a nice little effect of another steamship sort of out on the river there. So it was a sort of a moonlight scene.
Yeah. And then, of course, that leads to the Western wagons scene with the stagecoach, which is a way to get across the country even a lot faster. But, of course, they were coming across, in this case, Indians. An Indian
Yeah,
attack.
there's a animation loop of cowboys chasing Indians, chasing cowboys, chasing Indians, going into their loop. The Wells Fargo wagon in this was actually a real wagon. It was
That's
150 years old that they had dug up
crazy.
somewhere out west. So
It's
it
probably
was
their most valuable prop, right?
yeah. I wonder what happened to all this stuff after,
I don't know.
because
I
I don't think
know.
they have room in the archives for
I
all of
think
these
that often.
things.
Well,
yeah, because they were historical relics. So hopefully somebody took care of them.
yeah, I hope so too.
Hope so. And then, of course, that led to not just the horse, but the iron horse, with the steam locomotives going cross country at even a faster rate. But of course, the train got held up by robbers.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a scene that could have been in Western River Expedition, based
Mm.
on
that's right.
sort of Mark Davis kind of gags that could have fit in with the Wild West.
Yes, that would have been perfect.
Yeah, because they had off to the side a guy in white
Oh,
coming
yeah,
around
that's
to save
right.
the day, right? But they kind of
Yeah.
had him staged in such a way where They could have probably done a lot more, or maybe they had a lot more ideas of what they could have done with Mark Davis's gags.
This was one that he protested about in later years. He didn't like the way they had staged his gag there. So
that's all right. But then, of course, that led to ever more individual modes of transportation with the bicycles. And this was kind of a funny scene because they had all kinds of funny ways of showing people kind of going off on like weekend jaunts on their bicycles, including one guy trying to load up on his giant bicycle from up in a tree and having being chased by a dog. Another one where he had actually slipped and fallen into a pit of mud while his girlfriend was laughing. Is that right? Or I might have gotten that mixed up with the guy blowing up the tire.
No, there are a couple guys. They're having problems. There's the guy in the mud, and she's laughing at him, and the guy who's had a flat tire, and his girl is being impressed by a fancy man on a unicycle. So
there's always one of those.
Yeah, exactly. So it's trouble for everybody.
Which then leads to the first automobile, and of course, I think at this point, this is where we find where there's a police officer on a motorbike hiding behind a billboard, right?
Yes.
That's a little later. That's in the
that's later?
that's
the picnic scene.
In the picnic, out in the country. This is a bicycle shop.
Oh, that's right. This is
that we go into
the first automobile where the guy's kind of tinkering on his on the automobile. This is actually where probably the most amount of props were off on the kind of like a garage scene that led to the big city. Is that right?
And this was, that's right. I don't know if this was an intentional thing, but it was something I was kind of obsessed with as a kid, like a little detail in this ride. And I don't know if it was intentional, but you go into the bike shop and they're working on a car, and there's like an old bike, and we just got through the bicycle scene. There's an old bike like tossed over to the side. And so it seemed to me like as a kid that like each scene would have like the transportation, or a lot of scenes would have transportation from the previous scene that had been like popular, kind of tossed over to the side as people like adapted to like this new thing. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I thought that was funny as a kid.
Yeah, and you saw that a lot in the next scene, which is kind of the biggest scene in the entire attraction, the big city scene, where you see a lot of the old kind of transportation, where you see a horse-drawn streetcar kind of colliding with these newfangled automobiles, and it's at this scene where you have so much going on. It's essentially the first traffic jam, where you've got all these cars and wagons with horses all colliding on a big city street.
Yeah, this is the one, another one that they would always use to represent the ride, because it was just full of gags and just such a huge scene. So much motion, so much going on, and lots of chickens.
Yeah,
Lots of
especially
chickens.
that one guy who's kind of, his head is popping out of a manhole cover.
Yeah,
They always
exactly.
showed that one. I remember
Yeah.
in the ads. That's kind of a lot of the old things that I used to see on the Disney Channel. I would always see that guy.
That guy would, they'd always show him popping up. Yeah.
That was always fun for me to look like beyond the main, what they wanted you to look at, and see like down the other streets and what was happening, and look at all the different people and what they were doing. And
yeah, this one scene was kind of the epitome of, basically the rewritability factors, because there's so much going on that this would be, a reason to ride the attraction again, to see something that you missed the last time. Great scene. And then that led to the picnic scene that I was referring to earlier, where people would go out on Sunday drives. And, of course, then this is where you would find the police officer behind the billboard waiting for speeders, for course.
A bit of trivia about this scene.
Oh, please.
The car is a 1904 autocar. It's the oldest actual car in the entire World of Motion. It was the oldest authentic car that they were able to get.
Fancy.
That's really cool.
Very cool.
I think that cop behind the billboard was always so relatable to like all the dads in the cars that would,
All of
had
them
gotten pulled over and
that have
getting
gotten
speeding
pulled
tickets.
over, yep. I can relate. And of course, that leads to even newer modes of transportation, like the airplane. And they actually had a barnstorming scene with kind of like old vintage airplanes, and kind of like the old barnstormer that would I guess he was posing for photographs with ladies that were pretty impressed by his airplane.
Had driven out to the airfield. Yet another car fact. The car in this scene that they had driven out to the airfield in, it's a 1916 Chevrolet 3-door touring sedan. It was the rarest car in the world of motion. In 1982, there were only 7 believed to still exist in the world, and this was one of them. Yeah.
That's amazing. And of course,
I always loved that scene. Sorry, I'm jumping in. Just the faces of both of those animatronics standing there, like he was so smug and she was just so like, oh wow, he's so dreamy.
Yeah.
It was really funny.
I think he would later be shown in the Delta Dream Flight, as when they kind of had other barnstormers that were being presented. I don't think it was the same guy, but same idea.
Same spirit. Yeah.
Yes.
Fancy mustache.
And then, of course, I think this led to the the final scene, which is the Auto and Air from the 30s to the present, where they had 4 vintage cars, kind of like from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, lined up in front of these magazine covers of different magazines. I remember Collier's was one of them. Do you have
Yeah, they had
those?
Vanity Flair instead of Vanity Fair. I remember that.
Okay.
That's funny.
They had these classic scenes, like I think one was a newlywed couple who had just been married, who were kind of going off. One was a family with all the kids in the back of a station wagon. I think there were.
Yeah, they had like the hot rodders, like the
Yes.
college kids.
With all the stuff written on the little parts
Yeah.
of the car.
And of course, I think that is what led to, the speed ramps that we came to know and love. So we've already talked.
One thing about the
those.
cars was
No problem.
on the ones, the people who were married, they had just married, but they also had just wed for Wed Enterprises on the car. And Ward had actually wanted to paint that car. It was a 1939 Cadillac sedan. He had wanted to paint it pink, but the GM executives said no. Said, we've never made a pink car, and we're never going to make one now.
Wow.
So they would not have that in their pavilion.
That's hilarious.
Oh,
Oh my
wow.
gosh. Okay, so then that led to the speed ramps, or speed rooms, that I was talking about earlier, where they would have various forms of transportation with a sped up animation, making it look like you're going so much faster. They'd of course pump giant fans at you so you'd feel that wind through your hair as you were going through all of these speed rooms.
It really was a great transition to get out of all that you had just experienced and then to advance so many years into the future.
I think they had 2 speed rooms with all of these various forms of transportation. Then it was the third one that they then had that unique computer animation that they actually pulled from the movie Tron. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. That was the last one.
And then that led you into the center core, which we have already spoken about. But then, of course, after that, then they had this awesome gag with using the Pepper's Ghost, where you would basically see yourself in the futuristic, kind of like a bubble car. Kind of like same idea as that you see with the hitchhiking ghost at the end of Haunted Mansion. But
I would
instead of
always
that-
put my arms up to be like, haha, I
Yeah.
can see my arms coming through. I know
Yeah.
it's not real. But I still wanted to ride in those vehicles
yeah.
also. I was like, where are they? Where
Yeah,
can
they
I
were
see
cool.
those?
Yeah.
Still,
But it's
just-
funny how it ended up kind of like Haunted Mansion with the same sort of gag as Haunted
Yeah.
Mansion at the very end. That's
It's
funny.
it's a classic effect that
Yeah, go with what works.
that works. Yeah. It's amazing how that works. And of course, that led you into the Trans Center, which was the entire first floor of the building. Was the Trans Center, which basically took you to the future. Because basically, you've now seen everything with the past of transportation. Now they're going to show you the future of transportation, including what's going on with General Motors.
I loved getting off the ride, and it just seemed so vast in front of you. And of course, it was all the carpeted walls. It wasn't fancy carpet, but it was still carpeted walls. And it was just, I don't know, the post-show areas in all of Future World was just, it was like another whole attraction.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed it. You guys can talk about all the fun bird and robot and all that. I really enjoyed just seeing the new cars at the end.
Oh yeah, well that's at the very end. But yeah, let's talk about some of the shows that they had.
Sure.
Michael, you want to get in there first?
Well, it's funny, Zanny, you mentioned the wall carpet, because I watched a video of the ride to sort of prep for this, and I didn't get really emotional until it got to the unload area, and the unload area was so cool. With wall carpet, had like that stainless steel World of Motion like logo, and it had this like accent lighting that was really like moody and like cozy accent lighting.
Yeah.
And I was like, this was like the greatest atmosphere ever.
It really was.
Mm-hmm.
It was so cool and futuristic and like cozy. And I mean, that wall carpet is always great. But yeah, they had a whole bunch of different exhibits and shows that were extra beyond the ride.
Yeah, my favorite was I always was drawn to the water engine of all things, which basically it was essentially 9 different animated characters kind of explaining why their engine is the engine of the future. It had 9 various engines, including the water engine. One was the internal combustion. One was I think wind power. I can't remember all of the different ones.
Yeah, they had like any type of like energy you could think of. There was somebody like representing that.
And basically, each one was just talking about the pros of their engine and why it's the best.
I feel like I rarely went to that portion.
That's
Sorry.
okay.
Apologies to the water engine creators.
For some reason.
No, I was always hustled out of here too, because I was always want to see this theme, but we would always get hustled on because you only had so much time to the next ride, and
That's true.
I never got to linger as long as I would have liked.
That's too bad. Well, I do remember the Bird and the Robot, which was fun and they had a show similar to this at the Ford's Magic Skyway with a telephone pole of all things. And birds. But here was a bird and a robot, and this is kind of like a New Jersey, New York carny bird with a cigar in his mouth, of course. Just talking about the wonders of the robot and what he could do. And they essentially had an actual robot from the assembly line of a General Motors plant, just kind of performing a bunch of stunts. And long before Mr. Potato Head would take his ear off of out of his head, this robot would actually pick up props and display them, and which was kind of a first for audio animatronics, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, probably so. Yeah, it was a neat show, and like he would ring a bell and do all these spin a top, maybe, I think.
Yeah,
I'm
and that kind of led to the whole Expo Robotics thing that later appeared in Communicore West.
Yeah,
in Epcot's future, if you will.
I think it was a fun way to make robots look less scary.
Yeah.
In the sense that, like, oh God, they're everywhere and doing jobs that humans used to do. I think it was like, oh, they're fun and lovable.
Yeah, kind of humanizing them.
Yeah, right.
But in a good way. But then, of course, they always they showed those aero tests with these fancy future cars and how aerodynamic they were, and kind of putting them through wind tunnels and showing us what that was like. So that was kind of cool. And of course,
that was a short little show, but it was neat.
And I always remember, of course, the Lean Machine. That the little
You're obsessed
the
with the lean.
motorcycle of the future, I guess. A little three-wheeled thing where you kind of lean. And actually, they showed video of an actual guy, riding around in his little motorcycle, which was the
I was so obsessed with the Lean Machine. Like, for years, I was obsessed with the Lean Machine.
When is this going to come out on the market, right?
Right? I was always waiting. It looks so great. One of the weirdest things that I found as an adult and like looking for like weird little like relics and things, Hot Wheels actually made Lean Machine
Are
like
you
Hot
kidding?
Wheels. No, they're on eBay. I got a couple off of eBay because they're I couldn't believe it.
They were even
Hot
branded
Wheels
as
Lean
such?
Machine.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah. So yeah, you could have your own Lean Machine, not to scale.
Wow. I'll need to
That's
look
pretty
into that.
funny.
And of course, they also had the Dreamers Workshop, where they had kind of like these really extravagant ideas of things that they were basically just blue skying it, like trains that would kind of go across water.
Yeah, this always reminded me of like stuff you would see in like Popular Mechanics of like
Yeah.
hovercrafts and like
Oh, yeah.
giant futuristic like trucks that would carry, crazy things on maglev or
I
whatever.
think they even had the idea of kind of like a world cruise ship, where people would essentially
Yes.
live on a cruise ship
That
forever.
ended up happening,
Yeah.
I think.
I think
They
you're
talked
right.
about
No,
it.
there
I
have
don't know
been
if
a
it's still
couple of
floating
those.
around somewhere.
So yeah, and of course, then that is what led into the place which they have now. This is very popular, of course, even today. In Test Track, they would have the kind of the modern cars of the day. I think at that time, since it was by General Motors, they had one of every kind of General Motors car. They had a Chevrolet, a Cadillac, an Oldsmobile, a GMC truck, a Buick, and whichever one I'm missing. A Pontiac. That's right.
Pontiac is
And then
Chrysler, though, isn't it?
No, Pontiac
Oh,
was part of
separate,
GM.
okay.
And of course, when Saturn came along, they also had a Saturn car.
Oh, wow.
And so people, be able to get in and put, basically not take them out for a test drive, but basically kind of see what it felt like to be behind the wheel of, that car that you always wanted.
I bet those will be locked now when they reopen. No one's going to get to sit in the car anymore.
And of course, they've kept that idea even through today. Now that the new Test Track is sponsored only by Chevrolet, now they have a bunch of Chevrolet cars there. But this is something you would see in car shows that would tour the nation in your like state fair or whatever.
Yeah.
They used to say that this was the most photographed location in all of Epcot Center. That's what they would say, at least.
Wow,
That
that's
would not surprise
crazy.
me. Well, one thing I actually remember about this location is they always had like some sort of a giveaway here. They always had a desk where people could go to ask questions about the cars. But I remember they had like a free Atlas giveaway, where I remember I filled out a card and I actually got this, the General Motors Vacation Road Atlas. This is the original. Yeah, and I'm a huge Atlas guy, so I've practically torn this thing to shreds, but you'll see the GM logo right up here in the top corner. It's got little pictures of Disneyland on the front and back. But yeah, this is where I got my Road Atlas. It's from that. And I think, Michael, you have on your website several videos that you would be able to fill out a card and they would send you a VHS. Am I right?
Yeah, which as a kid was like the greatest deal in the world. You get like a free video.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
And
it
we've
would
seen
be
those
like
videos, and they're awesome.
they're great. It was like a little they'd give a little tour of Epcot and then plug the pavilion and everything.
It was a tour of all of Disney World.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Wow.
it wasn't so like heavy-handed where it would be like, here, buy our GM cars. Not at all. It was kind of like a great kind of like a Walt Disney World showcase, and they just happened to have little hints like this family would of course, get leave Epcot for the day, and their Buick would be right there at the front of the park.
Right.
And they'd hop in and drive to the other place, or like to their hotel, and they'd show that a little bit, them getting out of their Chevrolet at the Grand Floridian or whatever. So, but then of
That
course
was a
towards
great
the
giveaway.
end, Yeah, and then towards the end, they would have a much more extensive tour of the World of Motion, which was just a classic thing. But I remember that one year they had they kind of shifted gears a little bit, and they kind of went this little weird way with kind of like a child Leonardo da Vinci. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, this is one that I didn't come across till I was an adult, and came across. I think I got it off eBay, and this really nutso video about Leonardo da Vinci, and about dreamers, and it's really wild. You should seek it out, dear
We'll have
listeners,
to look
and
it.
find it on YouTube, because it's something
it's on
else.
your YouTube site, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken. So
yeah.
I remember.
That
So-
reminds
This
me of
really
the-
over the top, like crazy
yeah, it
Italian
shows him-
accent. It's so silly.
Yeah, it shows him at various stages of life, including as a child and as even a young, I think,
Yeah.
just recently married guy, and he's having these dreams of going to Disney World.
Yeah.
he's dreaming of castles of the future, and it just shows him as a modern day Leonardo.
I have a dream of this magical place.
I wonder if this was the
was
same
hilarious.
era as I'm pretty sure it was the Disney Magic Kingdom Club or whatever
Well, this
where they
was
did the
early
Christopher
90s,
Columbus
so oh, okay.
thing. Do you guys
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that one? Because I have that somewhere in a box, the Christopher Columbus one, with equally as cheesy an accent.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Everyone thought they should do explorers or creators or something, I guess, inventors.
Yeah. Well, I think they did Leonardo because he was in this attraction, of
That's
course.
true.
But it's really a trippy video, and so I love it.
Well, what was your favorite part of the attraction, Michael, as a child and as an adult looking back?
That is hard to say. Well, first I got to give a shout out to my dad, because this was his favorite.
Oh.
His favorite and ride, and he misses this one the most. You know what? There was something about, we mentioned how you would go out into that little atrium and curl around the thing and go up. The anticipation of that was, especially after you've been waiting in line, you get into your car, the doors close. It's like you're tucking in for a nice relaxing experience.
Oh yeah.
It's the anticipation of what's going to come. I think that was my favorite. Like the narration starts up,
Yes.
you're just getting ready for this big long ride, and that air conditioning blast is getting ready to come. So I think that was my favorite, just the anticipation of what was going to come ahead. It was so exciting.
What about yours? Was it the bowl? Probably not.
Definitely not the bull. I agree with Michael, but also just the ending scene. I wanted that room to go on for like another 5 miles so I could just be in that center core world.
Yeah,
Even though it's so separate from the rest of the ride because
really
there's
is,
no
yeah.
animatronics, it's all, miniature.
it's definitely so different.
But it was very Epcot.
Very. Oh my gosh, that's true. Very Epcot Center.
Yes.
I actually didn't have anything that was particularly a favorite. I just really like the incredible variety of show scenes from the ride itself, and just the vast amount of audio animatronics and just totally different things to see throughout, and just that it lasted so long. It was always just one of my favorites in that way.
We miss it.
Very much so.
Very
Test
much.
Track does not measure up. Sorry.
Yeah, we don't really have to go into what became of World of Motion. Eventually, they, when their 10-year contract gave up in 1992, I think they started doing year-by-year contracts, which extended it a few years, and then they closed it, I believe, January of 1997. Is that right?
January 1996.
Oh, seriously, that early?
Which is why, it's not as ingrained. I feel in the last years of Horizons, I rode Horizons so much, but I never got that experience with World of Motion.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
I
it,
agree.
I think
It
you can
seems so
definitely
much more
thank
different.
the end of World of Motion kind of actually gave Horizons a few extra years because they couldn't have two
Yes.
attractions on that side closed. So they had closed Horizons a little bit before that, but then when the World of Motion closed, they basically reopened Horizons for a few years just to have a little bit more population on that side, a little bit more.
There's a weird little side note here is when we went in like I want to say 94 or 95, maybe 95. We were just kind of doing our own thing in Future World. We had kind of split up, and I'm still so jealous about this. My brother got recruited by, my brother who was, a kid at the time, probably 14 or so. They took him upstairs to the lounge in the GEM lounge and pitched him with like probably a group of other people what would become Test Track as like a focus group kind of deal.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll have to like hit him up for the details, but it was a different show because it had like John Goodman and Rosie O'Donnell and like after I was like, tell me more, because I wanted to know every detail of what was going to happen, and I was super jealous. They gave him Disney dollars for his time. It was a whole deal, but yeah, I remember it was a kind of like car testing thing, but with celebrities and things.
Yeah.
So.
And you just missed out.
Yeah, and I missed it. I could have been there too. Whatever.
Wow.
Wow.
Well, we thank you so much for joining us, Michael, and giving us these tidbits and details and this fun Jeff Crawford story at the end.
I know. I'll have to harass him about it.
Yeah, let us know an update on that, what was supposed to happen before.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to end this with the final narration because it's just so great. As the ride was over, it was an inspirational ending read by Gary Owens, which I cannot do justice to, but
no, there's no way.
Yes, our world has indeed become a world of motion. We have engineered marvels that take us swiftly over land and sea, through the air and into space itself. And still bolder and better ideas are yet to come, ideas that will fulfill our age-old dream to be free. Free in mind, free in spirit, free to follow the distant star of our ancestors to a brighter tomorrow.
That's perfect.
I mean, it doesn't get much better than original Epcot Center narration, in my opinion.
Good times.
Michael, again, thank you so much for joining us. And of
thank
course,
you for having me.
Thank you. And we can find you at the Progress City Radio Hour.
Yeah, it's back.
Yes.
Wherever you download your podcasts and listen. We encourage you to because it's great fun.
Yes.
Michael
I
and his
highly
brother
recommend
Jeff.
it.
And on Twitter, you're at Progress City USA. You have your blog as well, which I don't know how you update it. I don't update mine that much either, but yours has actual incredible reference
There's
items.
old stuff on there.
Yeah, that is
it's a
evergreen.
great resource.
Exactly.
It's one of my favorites.
Check him out there as well. And yeah, we thank you for joining us. And if you haven't subscribed or liked where you can download podcasts for us, please do so. You can watch us, of course, and see all of this if you haven't already on youtube.com/Xanaland, where we encourage you to like and subscribe as well. See all our other fun videos and episodes.
And please leave a comment.
Yes.
Or we encourage that. And like questions as well.
Exactly. If you have any questions for our expert, we'll pass them along and get some answers. But thank you all for joining us on this episode of Up the Waterfall. See you next time.
Bye now.